This is Howard Austinson, EVP, Chief Commercial Officer at Kongsberg Digital. I'm here with Adam Ballard at Hess at the Future Digital Twin and AI USA. I would say been a very exciting day. I've had a lot of interesting reflections amongst digital twin practitioners that are at various stages of implementing or considering implementation of digital twin use cases or AI use cases. Feel like we're forming a community now, aren't we? Like things are coming together. What are if you're reflecting on what you've heard today, what are some of the things that stand out to you, Ben?
I think so much stands out. I'll tell you one thing is I still feel like we're all talking about different things when we say digital twin. So which is kind of interesting. Some kind of equate it to that physical, like, look at that really cool cartoon of my asset.
Right.
Which certainly has some use cases associated with it. But then I hear some people talking about, a twin of the, a workflow or a process and being able to kind of monitor that process.
Yeah.
It's so I found that's been very insightful.
Yeah.
Just to kind of see, like, where are people at? Are they really focused on that sexy cartoon? Or are they focused on something that's truly monitoring and performance managing?
Yeah.
Something that should be happening, for instance.
Yeah, because you kind of need something, if you want to mobilize someone, you need something a little bit maybe eye-catching to catch your attention, right? But
yes,
I was also reflecting on the same thing, and I heard, okay, after a few years now, we're going from what used to be analytics, like in pockets maybe, and accuracy and precision on those representative models, more back to basics, but maybe these are changing the work processes. Maybe that's a really difficult part. I don't know if, I feel like a lot of people are talking about these things today. Change management came up a lot. And
yep.
Is this, so if looking at, your own experience and journey with digital, right? I mean, I guess these, digital is a label that's come up recently, but I, personally think is a longer journey with that, where we've tried to make processes, like you say, into systems, Interested in your take on the human, how much, does the human factor play into this? So, how much of it is really change management versus technology now?
So I kind of go back to something I learned way back in my operations days around, make sure you're looking at things through the lenses of people, process, plant, and performance. And just take plant out and throw in technology. And I think you've got the digitalization of the oil field and where the things you need to consider. Personally, I think the technology is the easy part. I think the tough part is the people, the process, and the performance, right? And, from a people standpoint, it's a cultural thing. And that's from your users, your operators, your engineers, but it's your leaders too, right? And then to sustain some of these solutions, it's your IT side.
Yeah.
How do they need to change, and what's their culture from how they work today to how they work tomorrow?
Yeah. On that, actually, you had a really good reflection earlier today, when we were talking about projects versus process, right? Could you maybe elaborate a little bit about that for the audience here?
Yeah. So I've been in the industry 25 years and seen a lot of digitalization processes, right? I remember back in my BP days when, data's the new oil, like treat data like an asset. And thank goodness we didn't treat our assets like data, because it would have turned out really bad. But so because it, to be honest, it feels like we're still a couple decades behind in terms of the implementation of a lot of this. The AI is fancy and it's cool. And everyone seems to want to apply it, but there's nothing that a simple set of rules couldn't do,
right?
To add value.
That's interesting, because a lot of what I've seen is initially a lot of engineers gravitate towards the really difficult, really complex, intricate problems, and then later on complain about scale, right?
Yep.
So, but you're saying that maybe there's Goldilocks here with simplicity, right?
Absolutely.
So, can you give some examples maybe of use cases that you're thinking about?
Yeah. So I think a simple example would be this. So I've got in our Bakken asset, or in an onshore asset, typically you've got hundreds, if not thousands of miles of pipelines. Very similar to like a subsea system. I can build a really cool pipe sim or Olga model or gap model and model that whole system and really understand the performance of those pipelines. But just as well, I can build a very simple Bernoulli type equation, which is just saying that, look, the pressure drop from this point to that point is quadratic to the rate, right? So it's some constant times the rate squared plus another constant. I know I'm getting into the math detail. I'm a math nerd, but it's just quadratic. The pressure drop on a piece of pipe is quadratic to flow. So I guess what I'm getting at is a simple use case, and we've implemented this at scale, is, well, let's actually build that relationship and at scale use the data, the years of operating history, to understand what that relationship should look like.
Yeah, exactly.
And based on how far we are from that relationship, I can tell you how much liquid's in that pipeline, whether it needs to be pigged to clean those liquids out. On an offshore oil pipeline, I've done this before, I can tell you how much wax or paraffin is in that pipe. And when we run a pig, I can tell you whether it cleaned it all the way or whether we need to run another one, with just simple relationships.
It's so interesting that you're bringing out these examples. I know we also talked about you having worked offshore and doing onshore, right? And moving from the offshore scenario into the offshore scenario, it sort of begs for simpler solutions because you have maybe potentially much higher well count, more rapid decline curves. You're going to have a scaling problem on your hands. That is numbers of assets and the dynamic sort of arrangement of assets. And it's funny that you mentioned, flow assurance as the example. We also, we've been in the game of building multi-phase flow models for 25 plus years, right? Where you get to the wax depositions and the hydrate formation and multi-phase flow through, tiebacks that go through different temperature zones. So you have hydrate formation risk and the need to predict. But moving from the offshore environment, high pressure, high flow and volume throughput, to the sort of higher numbers of assets, but maybe there's acceptable approximations that just makes life a little bit better for the operators, right?
Yep.
Which it sounds like, just listening to you, that this is sort of maybe a concept that we should embrace a little bit more. I was recently in a conversation with an operator. This was an offshore operator that they got stuck on a scoping exercise because people couldn't agree on a decimal point of precision. Meanwhile, they're having operating issues, So time spent discussing maybe if they could find an approximation solution, they would move forward. But process of improvement versus project, right? Is this coming from the inherent sort of capital project model in the oil and gas industry? Where is this mindset of beginning and end?
Yeah, you brought that up earlier and I didn't answer, but yes. Yes. So upstream oil and gas is very capital intensive. What comes with that is a culture, in my opinion. What comes with that is a culture of, give me the perfect solution. Tell me when it starts. Tell me when it ends.
Yeah.
Tell me when I get the return on this capital.
Yeah.
That culture or that mentality, I think, has stunted the digitalization space.
Yeah.
Over the last several decades, in that, to really get this stuff right, you don't know what the right answer is until you jump in.
Yeah.
And you're not going to know exactly what that roadmap to get from here to there is until you take that first step. Right. And a waterfall type, capital type of investment approach to this, in my opinion, doesn't allow you to veer around to get to that end point.
Yeah.
I use this it's not a quote, it's a paraphrase, but, Mike Tyson put it well when he said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Right.
Yeah.
And I think we have a plan, but the reality is every plan I've seen, whether it's been worked for 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years before that first step, as soon as you take that first step, you realize, we're going to have to adjust.
Yeah.
Right. So the ability to adjust quickly is what's going to make the difference. Having to go back to some governance board, that meets once a month to make a slight adjustment in your plan, it's going to make these things fail.
It's going to be very difficult too, with the elevated data volumes. We're talking about the pace of innovation to do monthly or quarterly governance, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm sort of hearing is we probably need some guardrails. We can't just, invest infinitely or work without a scope or direction. But having the structure doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have the heavy upfront requirements gathering, the documentation of the statement, the specification, if you will, down to the tightest level or most granular level. Perhaps we need a new business model, a new way of working, right? But have you seen, your observation now, right? They're sitting in many projects. Are people more willing to adopt that sort of guardrail style governance now, you think? Or do we have ways to go to, should we educate more on different business models? Because if you think about other industries, right? A lot of the tooling that we see on the digital side, they grew out of approaches from other industries, which arguably had, lower margins, right?
Yep.
So what are we doing? Are we getting better in terms of understanding this? Do you see some progress, or do we just have ways to go and we need to keep educating?
Well, I think we're always getting better. I don't know if we're necessarily there.
Ironic, by the way, isn't it? Like we're this continuous process, but yeah.
We're continuously improving, right? I would say it's probably spotty in terms of maybe in some areas, but not others.
Yeah.
And and I mentioned this earlier in the panel discussion is, finding that first, if you want to just jump into this, finding that first use case, I think is critical. It's the critical one, because this is what's going to set the tone for any change you make, right? And so finding a use case that's value adding, right? And we say value, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Well, the user needs to find value in it, because if the users don't find value in it, they're not going to use it.
Right.
And it doesn't matter, what leadership says. They will, they're not going to use it to the intent of, but that's not the only value you need, right? I can make an engineer's day way easier by automating or using AI potentially. But if it doesn't show a bottom line value to the P&L, then the leadership is not finding value in it. So you got to find that use case that's valuable to the user, valuable to those that are accountable for the profit and loss statements, and be able to show value to both and then deliver on it.
Yeah, exactly.
And not in years, in months.
In months, right? And gone are the days where you have a 2 to 5 year horizon.
Exactly.
Return on investment. That's also something we see, by the way. All the programs are being held accountable for within 12 months, value drops. So definitely more tangible near term. Are you concerned that compromises that long-term transformation, especially on brownfield assets? Or,
not at all.
Or is that? No, you're not.
No, I think, look, my wife used to be a teacher. Now she's a counselor, but in elementary school. And one thing, she's taught me many things, way many things. Most of them good too. But one of the things that really resonated with me was it's about repetition. Like you can say it once, doesn't matter. Show it in a PowerPoint slide, doesn't matter. Showing it over and over and leading by example, repeating over and over, people will eventually start that transformation on their own.
So be relentless.
Yeah.
Communication, value delivery, don't stay quiet if things are going well. Make sure you have advocacy in the organization. That makes total sense.
And the best way to get advocacy is to deliver.
Just to do it, yeah.
deliver
in the
fast,
exactly.
and build that capital with the leadership, build that capital with the workforce.
Do you feel that there's been, I'm not trying to be leading in the question, but it sounds like there's been quite a few programs without return on investment then, if it's getting more difficult or challenging to get these initiatives off the ground. Is that, that type of credibility, right? Is that, slowing down the sort of the startup of new initiatives now, you feel? I remember a not so distant past where it was all about building the big data platforms. We're going to solve the whole thing. We're going to,
and first we're going to build the data platform.
First, we're going to build the data platform. We're going to sensorize everything. All the IoT vendors were going to make a killing off of sensors, and we're going to put it in the cloud, and only then can we build this fantastic use case universe, right?
Yep.
My experience is that it's not like that anymore. You got to be much more surgical. Maybe the end state is a mature environment, but it seems more incremental in terms of how you bolt on and build out these things. But I'm interested in your take.
Yeah, and I think it's what you kind of hit on earlier is start simple, right? So change the mindset from a what do I need to be able to do this, which is a very open-ended question, which allows people to completely redesign, and step back and say, well, wait a minute. People are currently doing stuff. If you focus on action, which I typically do, because telling me about an issue with a compressor doesn't add business value unless action gets taken that changes the trajectory of the business, right? This is what would have happened, but this is what happened, which is where that process comes in. When I say people process, technology and performance, is you got to make sure it gets into an action-based system so that you're taking action on what you're learning and you're actually changing the business. But where I was going with that is, we operate as an industry, 80 to 95% reliability of our kit, availability of our assets. That's what the data we have. Why do I need more data?
Right. Need better data, better quality integration.
Yes. But if you focus on an operator or an engineer, they're using data today to make decisions, and getting action taken on the assets. I would say, kind of getting back to that first use case, right? What do we want to do to make that quick impact? Well, buying a bunch of equipment or a bunch of sensors, getting those installed, and then starting, that could take years. So use the data you have and just use it in a way that is currently being used.
This is great, because I wanted to ask you, just for viewers as well, who are sort of on the fence of, okay, they've heard about these massively, let's say, overspent, low ROI programs, right? They don't want to be one of those. And here you have gone around the asset base and you have identified some use cases, but you're not quite sure. Any advice to, people, teams that are sort of creating a bit of a coalition around these initiatives? I want to get things kicked off, how to engage with leaders and get buy-in with the business. Any sort of, advice for those people?
Yeah. And again, I will say, it just working 20 years in deep water, working now 3 years in onshore unconventional, it's definitely a horses for courses type of thing. Right? What works in a deep water asset is not necessarily the use case for an onshore unconventional. But there are use cases that will hit both. The advice I'd give is, and it's what I've always kind of, whether I've been successful at doing what I do or not, I'll let your viewers determine that, is I always start with the data-driven action workflow, right? Which is, because I want action to be a part of this, right? So if you think about the data-driven action workflow, there's a lot of different variations of it, but it really starts with something needs to tell me that action is needed, right? I've got something that's unhealthy. That compressor vibration is up, or this predictive analytics is saying something about this pump. Then there's a diagnostic phase of that. Like, okay, something's wrong. Let me go figure out what that is. Usually involves more data, usually more information to do that diagnostic. And then ultimately, it needs to get into an action-based system, and action needs to be taken. So where I know I've always focused is completing, and then once that action's taken, make sure you're completing the loop. That's pretty valuable information. Like if you go and complete something because this told you to do it and you came up with this diagnosis and you, therefore these actions, it'd be good to know, did that work? Did it make it healthy again, that piece of equipment, right?
Yeah, so data into action, completion, but critically the feedback loop. Yeah, so that you can learn from your mistakes and continue or improve upon.
Your solutions are going to need to go over that entire workflow.
Exactly.
If your solution is just the surveillance piece to tell you when something's wrong, I mean, from my experience,
it's just a data point that's shooting out there.
Yeah.
You got to deliver the data point into the workflow and ensure that the insight from
that action gets taken on it. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Adam, fantastic insight. I'm sure people will appreciate that. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.